In this video, we're going to take a look at the Apache Maven deploy plugin. Now, this is a plugin that's going to be responsible for moving your built files up to the Maven repository. So a remote repository typically that you can share with other developers. So this very important thing, very important concept within Maven where you're allowed to publish the artifacts. Now, the one thing about this is let's go ahead and take a look at the usage on it. Now, a lot of the other plugins, the configuration's done within by bringing in the plugin like we did on the other examples and then setting properties. The settings for the deploy plugin are actually part of the Maven POM. There's actually formal elements within the XML schema. You can see here for distribution management, this tells Maven where to publish to. This works in conjunction with settings XML. This is going to be in your .m2 directory. We haven't talked about this yet. This allows you to set up usernames and passwords for your repositories. Now, at this point, I can't really demo this plugin because we don't have a place to deploy to. So if I come over here and run it, if I just come in and run deploy, you're going to see that it errors out because we haven't defined anything within our Maven POM. We can see that we are getting an error because the required repository element for distribution management is missing. So obviously so. But what I want to point out here is if we look through the output from Maven, we can see that it ran the full build lifecycle, and deploy is one of the last things that it runs. And see that it builds a jar, installs it, and then we get down. One of the last steps here is the deploy plugin to execute that, and this is the one that actually fails. So we kind of start to the top here and work our way down through the various plugins of the default build lifecycle. And deploy is going to be the last step of that to deploy the artifact out to a remote Maven repository. And in this case, we don't have anything defined. Now, this is like going to be setting up these repositories and deploying to them is like a whole section of the course. So I'm not going to demonstrate this right now. There's some complexities that we have to work through as far as having a place to deploy to. And we'll completely cover that. The main takeaway here is I want you to remember that there is documentation on that. Underneath the covers, we are going to be using the Apache Wagon module to handle all the communications, primarily HTTP. That's good. But if you come in here and look at examples for project deployment, if you need to use FTP or SSH, there's directions on doing that. I personally never have had to use FTP or SSH to deploy Maven artifacts. It's usually been HTTP and username and password for the target server, which is what we will be demonstrating in the class. There's quite a bit to set that up. At this point in time, I just want to get your feet wet with the deploy plugin. And remember, when we do run it, the key takeaway from this video that I want you to have on top of the capabilities and how it's defined inside the POM is when you run the deploy phase of the build lifecycle, it is going to run all the others. So remember up here, because of our configuration, the clean plugin is going to run because we configured it to run in the initialize phase. And then we get resources compiler, resources for test compiler, surefire. Then we can see jars it up, and ultimately we get down to the deploy plugin, which fails. So main takeaway, but coming up in the course, we will be looking at the deploy plugin quite a bit more.